Hello, everyone. My name is Stuart Crawford, and welcome back to another webinar here in our webinar series from Intellis Solutions. Just before we get started with our formal presentation today, just a few housekeeping items. We are using the Zoom webinar platform, and you will see on your screen a Q&A platform and a chat platform. And from there, you can go ahead and ask us questions through the Q&A panel, or if you have any technical issues with the presentation today, please use that chat function to alert us, and we'll get to work on seeing what the issues are with the chat or with the presentation. As we're waiting for everybody to hop on, we do host these webinars every month. Please watch your emails for future events coming up. We do have a cybersecurity webinar coming up in September with ID Agent, talking about the dark web. And then October is Cybersecurity Awareness Month, and we have something special planned for October as well. And before you know it, those two presentations will be here. Okay, well, I think everybody's getting on. It's going to be on for today's presentation. I am going to introduce Brian Laughlin, and Brian is one of the founders and principals at Intellis, and he will take the over the webinar for me here today, and I hope everybody enjoys the presentation.
Thanks, Stuart. This is Brian Laughlin with Intellis Solutions. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. I know we have a number of our current clients, so thank you for joining. We also have a number of other people outside of our current client base, so welcome. I am one of the principals, as Stuart said, of Intellis Solutions. We're a full-service IT consulting firm offering everything from managed services to ERP implementations and everything in between. Today we're honored to have Anthony and John from LI Tech Advisors. We've partnered with them as part of our educational series to provide more information around ADA compliance and what you have to look for and what you have to, obviously not say worry about, but be vigilant for with your current business. IT, obviously this kind of thing is very important to be focused on. So with that being said, I'm going to turn it over to Anthony with LI Tech Advisors.
Well, thank you very much, Brian and Stuart. This is Anthony from LI Tech Advisors. Basically, we're a company that does ADA compliance and testing. And, just going to give, this is a little intro into what it's all about, why it's important, and what you need to do going forward as far as your website and applications and so on. Again, the URL for this presentation is on the screen, and Brian will most likely be sharing this out after the webinar is over. Again, my name is Anthony. Basically, I'm a founder of LI Tech Advisors. We've been doing this, been in business for over 30 years. On the ADA side, we've been doing it around 10 years, way before this became a thing, pretty much in 2018, which I'll go through with you. But basically, we have CPAC certified accessibility experts on staff. I'm one of them. And, we're able to certify a website accessible. I'm going to give you a little brief intro to accessibility, what it's all about and so on, and why it's important. Most people are not even aware of the difficulties people with disabilities face and we take it kind of for granted. There are a lot of people with disabilities that still would like to use and enjoy the website, surf the web, as well as using an application. But if you're mobility impaired, blind, or have some kind of disability, it makes it much, much more difficult, especially if the website is not designed properly. There's such a assistive technology as screen readers and so on. For example, if you're blind, you would use a screen reader, which would read with the contents of what's on the screen. And if you're mobility impaired, there's also, facilities for taking care of that as far as using a tab key or, again, using the keyboard to navigate through the pages. But the idea is to have giving you an idea of how people with disabilities use the web, and the frustrations they feel when they can't get to what they need. All right, and that's where the problems come in. That's where the lawsuits come in. All right, so basically the internet, when it was conceived, I mean, everybody, they invented the mouse, which is a wonderful thing. You move it around the screen, click. Now that's fine as long as you're able to use that. If you're blind, a mouse is useless. Mobility impaired, you can't use a mouse. And if you're deaf, of course, you cannot be able to hear the audio. So in other words, if you have any kind of disability, the web becomes a problem in trying to navigate, again, unless things are taken into account and proper design procedures are followed. The different types of disabilities, all right, is visual, it's color blindness, low vision, blindness, auditory is deaf, hard of hearing, mobility, paralysis, even like arthritis and so on. You have repetitive motion, carpal tunnel. You have problems using a mouse, basically. Cognitive is memory impairments and so on. You may be trying to read something and the wording is such that it's very hard to understand because of the way it was worded. Again, these are the types of disabilities, but usually what happens with when you're dealing with making a website compliant, if you make it where a blind person can see, basically read the site, okay, you've covered about 90 to 95% of the problems. I'm going to go into now the impact, all right, about how many people just in this, in the United States, have some kind of disability. There's 500,000 people just in New York State alone. 20 million people in New York State, according to the Department of Health, all right, have some kind of disability. It's like 1 in 5 people. 25 million people in the United States have a severe visual impairment, and 57 million people in the U.S. live with a disability of some sort. It's basically 20% of the population is comprised of people with disabilities. So, when you're thinking about why this is important, number one, it's doing the right thing. Okay, which going to larger companies and everything, doing the right thing is one thing, but you also have the lawsuits that maybe that you can incur. And the other whole thing, and that's what these numbers show you, is it's a market. It's an entire marketplace. If I go into the next slide, we go into worldwide numbers. Worldwide numbers, you're talking 350 million people that are visually impaired. 1 billion people total, it's the size of China, that are disabled. And this other number here is 2.3 billion people are the friends and family, all right, that work on an emotional connection. I'll give you an example of that. My father-in-law, for example, years ago, he passed away, but to this day, we still go to the restaurants that were compliant for him because he was in a wheelchair. So if he had to use, he used a wheelchair and he, to use a bathroom, just to get in the door and so on, was a task in many restaurants, but a lot of them were very amenable to him. And so we're able to use it. And to this day, we still use those restaurants. People with disabilities in the United States alone have $8 trillion of disposable income. Okay, so you're dealing with an entire market here. And that's why even when we had gone in, we had a client, it was Nike at the time, they made something like a Fitbit type of calorie counter wristband that displayed the calorie counts and the number of steps you took and so on. And I told the guys, I said, look, make this thing vibrate, and where it vibrates out the numbers, you've opened yourself up to 350 million people worldwide. It's an entire market. Okay, the types of technologies that people with disabilities tend to use. For example, if you're visually impaired, blind, specifically speech to text. Let me get back. I jumped one slide there. Sorry, guys. The screen readers. You have a couple different screen readers out there. JAWS is the most popular. There's another one that's actually free. It's NVDA for the visually impaired. What it does, it converts what's on the screen into readable text. Again, it's only assuming that the website or application was designed in such a way that it can be utilized. All right, so that's why it's important to make sure your websites are compliant and designed properly. Other things are like screen magnifiers and so on. We also have speech to text technology where you can speak to the computer. And then there's also Braille. Okay, the types of guidelines and so on that we're working with is it's called the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, abbreviated WCAG. They were created in 1999, and we're currently at a version 2.1. They constantly are changing and upgrading the guidelines to go hand in hand with the technology that's out there. So as things change, as technology changes, they update the guidelines in accordance to make sure that they are addressing the latest technology. To give you an idea too, the amount of the whole thing that you need to be concerned with these days is the lawsuits. Ever since 1973, when the Rehabilitation Act was signed into law, it wasn't until like 2018 that where things started getting a little funky with the law, because what happened was that recently the Department of Justice sent basically made it so that websites are now brick and mortar, so that the ADA now comes into play. But the thing is, what I'm trying to say here is that because of this little confusion going on and so on, is that lawsuits have picked up, where almost every hour you're getting a lawsuit, and companies or attorneys are going after smaller companies now because they're easy targets, and they also tend to settle within 60 days. And the average settlement can be 10 to 25,000 and more. I've seen it up to as far as $50,000 now. You also have to be concerned because once you've gotten sued, and if you haven't remediated and fixed your website, there's a 25% chance you're going to get sued again in the same year. Also, as far as like the hot spots, California, New York, Florida, New Jersey, Texas, which is totaling around 63% of the current cases. The cost of non-conformance and non-compliance is the opposing party's attorney fees. Award to the plaintiff will also likely, mandate the courts to conform to accessibility standards that are tighter than what the standards are, because there's different levels of compliance, and usually we go for the 2.1, with AA compliance, but the courts can actually turn around and make you go AAA, which is very difficult. So that's why it's important to make sure your site is accessible, remediate as soon as possible as well. Give you an idea of like the accessibility web design examples of what breaks a site. Okay, for example, you put a blog up, you put a picture up, and you need to tag that picture, and it's an alt tag. It's actually a meta tag that you would normally use for SEO, but what you need to make sure you do is in that picture you should be describing it. You also have to make sure that it's keyboard accessible, so that you put the mouse aside, that you hit the keyboards using the arrow keys and so on, and the tab key, that you're able to navigate the website. You also need labels for the input fields. For example, you have a form to be filled out. You have to make sure that all the labels behind it, it just doesn't say field 1, field 2, field 3. You actually have to make it say last name, first name, address, and so on, and to make sure that they're visible. Okay. To give you the idea of like why this is so important is that a person coming to the site, a blind person coming to the site needs to be able to literally hear what that image is about. So it's got to be a descriptive image. In this case, it's a Braille keyboard on the right and a hand, hovering over it. So you'd actually describe it in such a way so if a screen reader hit it. The other thing you have to keep in mind too is when you do all this, you're not taking away from the graphic richness of the site. You're actually adding to it. And you have to keep in mind too that Google is blind, all right? So that Google doesn't see the site, it reads the site. So by doing all this extra work, you're actually making the site accessible, and also SEO-wise, you're really enhancing the site dramatically. So it's important to make sure that, not only are you making it accessible, but it also there's a side benefit of that. It's now becoming SEO friendly. Now, let's say, what proactive steps can you take to give an idea of like the major issues and so on? You could run a quick test on your most visited pages of the website where the violations might exist. We call them flows, like a way of a journey through the site. So you can do some quick tests. There are automated tools, but you have to keep in mind automated tools are anywhere from like 40 to most 50% accurate. And they should always be used in conjunction with somebody that's testing, person with disability, or at least with somebody that's certified in accessibility, that they know how to read those results. Um, Again, automated tools are great, give you a quick idea of like how bad a site is, but you really need to do some manual testing. There's one of the tools, and we have a link on here. It's called Wave. It's a Wave accessibility tool. What it actually allows you to do a page, like your home page, and give you an idea of how bad it is from an automated standpoint. But the manual testing is the most important. All right, accessibility, when it comes down to it, a person coming to the site that's disabled is going to be there manually. All right, then that it's not an automated test coming in, so they're going to be trying to navigate the site. So that's why it's important to actually go through the site using a screen reader and so on to make sure that things are accessible and things flow properly. Also, you need, what I would suggest you do is, once you've found some, if you ran this tool and you have issues, you have to contact your website designer and say, look, I need to be compliant. All right. And, lawsuits are directed at the business owner, not the website designer. All right. So ultimately, the website is, and the owner of the website is the person that needs to make sure it's compliant. Okay. The other piece of this too is about your staff, people that are handling the phone calls and so on. One of the things we tell companies right off the bat is put an accessibility statement. Accessibility statement is something you pop at the, in the footer of the page of every page that says accessibility statement, because a person with disability looks for that. Because if they're having a problem with the site, they want to be able to contact somebody. Okay, so they're going to click on that. It should be a phone number, an email, and a way to help remediate the issue they're having. So it's also very, very important that your staff at the other end is trained on that, because there was I won't say specifically, but there was a hotel chain that had recently put up a ad for for an application, job application. Now, what happened is that that job application was not accessible. The field labels were not labeled, and so on. So a person with a disability was trying to, get on, apply for that job. So what they did is they called the number, and they spoke to a person at the other end. Said, "Listen, I'm trying to fill out that form. I'm blind, all right, and I'm having a problem because it's not accessible." The person at the other end, not being trained, said, "Wait a minute, you're blind? We can't hire you." So, bam. I mean, a couple of things happened there. I mean, number one, it triggered a lawsuit almost immediately, and they also had issues with just discrimination. So, people, it's very important that your staff get trained, because that's how lawsuits start. All right, is the how empathetic, sympathetic the people on your staff are, that when somebody calls, they're understanding. So yeah, okay, you're having a problem, no problem. I'll take your application right over the phone. Let me help you fill it out. But and at the same time, so we're working on, we definitely will address that problem. Okay, now what happens if you do get served? All right, the 5 steps you need to do. Number one is you have to speak to an attorney that's familiar with these types of cases, right? Preferably, somebody that's familiar with the ADA. You also have to create a remediation plan. You got to fix the site. You got to talk to your website designer. You got to bring in a CPAC certified accessibility expert if need be, if your website designer is not one already. But you have to create a plan and start instituting it. Immediately put an accessibility statement on there saying that you've now taken steps. All right. Carry out the remediation as quickly as possible. And again, train your staff to understand how to properly interact with people with disabilities. Very important. And then also, after you've done all this, all right, all you need is one blog post or a simple change, and you broke the site because it wasn't adhered to, or you didn't test it, or the person putting the blog post in didn't tag an image. So you have to make sure your website gets tested regularly, and especially after any changes or updates. Now, if you have somebody that's doing the website that's already a CPAC certified accessibility expert, and so on. They know enough to check things as they're designing it. The best place to do it, especially if you're redesigning a site from the ground up, is make sure you have accessibility baked into it from the beginning, into the DNA of the site. It won't cost you anything more to do that. All right, because it's just, whether you pick menu A or menu B, menu A is accessible, menu B isn't. Well, menu A is accessible. You pick that from the very beginning, you're great. However, after you've designed a site, you've picked menu B, it's going to take you a lot of money to fix the site later on. It's always easier to fix it before time. So it's very costly after the fact to fix something by a factor of maybe 100 to 1,000 times. All right, so you have to be very, upfront. Accessibility needs to be baked in from the beginning. Who's exempt? Well, the only two organizations, that are exempt are private clubs and religious organizations, entities controlled by them. Basically, this was from the original Rehabilitation Act. They were exempt back then, so they've kind of grandfathered themselves in. So those are the only organizations that are currently exempt from the WCAG requirements. CPAC certification. There are a bunch of links on here about how to get a CPAC certification. So if you're a website designer, I highly recommend you go ahead and do that. I mean, basically what we try to do here at LI Tech is teach a fisherman to fish. I mean, sure, we can help bring a site into compliance and so on, but we also want, companies and website designers and so on to kind of stand on their own and be able to go forward and, check things themselves. And it's important that you get these kind of certifications and have, it's basically a CPAC is certified professional accessibility core competencies. Okay. But basically it's a very important thing to have. The WCAG guidelines, I have links here to them. The W3C, it has a lot of information on there. Web content accessibility guidelines, and basically the documents and everything explain it. You also have a bunch of examples on there as far as like what good practices are. Highly recommend that. And now I have a little video here about we put together why it is important. And here we go.
What all businesses need to know to avoid being sued. What all businesses need to know to avoid being sued in 2019. In 2018, the Department of Justice has declared that the Americans with Disabilities Act, ADA, now applies to websites. What does this mean? Your virtual presence is now considered by law to be a place of public accommodation. Why should you care? Your website now falls under the same regulations as a physical store. This is equivalent to your store not having handicap ramps or parking spots. Over 5,000 lawsuits have already been filed as of 2019. Companies such as Domino's, Target, Hobby Lobby, Winn-Dixie, Five Guys, and many small businesses have been sued. So are you next on this list? What can you do about this? LI Tech Advisors works closely with a nonprofit advocacy group called My Blind Spot. We help you fix your website, allowing the over 1 billion people with disabilities to enjoy your content. By making your website accessible, your website will become more user-friendly, expand your overall market reach, and improve your search engine optimization. It only takes one person out of the 1 billion people to initiate a lawsuit against you. We can assist you throughout the entire process. And we don't stop there. We have made a commitment to raise awareness through training, education, presentations, panels, keynotes, articles, and even a TED Talk. We feel if we can get the word out to enough people, we can achieve our goal of equal access for all. Contact us today.
All right, that was a cute little short video, kind of covers things. Here's our contact information. If you do have any questions, we'd be more than happy to help you out. Also, you can contact Brian. He's also, be able to help you out. If you have any questions at this point, please put them into the Q&A and I'd be more than happy to answer them. Brian?
Thanks, Anthony. Really appreciate it. This topic is just becoming that much more increasingly prevalent in our client base and everywhere. And we appreciate you educating us on the topic and ways we can kind of get around it. As Anthony said, we at Entellus are more than happy to help work with you and put you in touch with the right people. We can do some of those assessments with the tools that Anthony had talked about, and then try to figure out next steps and making sure you're not a victim of some sort of lawsuit or something like that.
So we do have some questions, gentlemen, that came in during Anthony's presentation. If you want me to go ahead and ask them now.
Absolutely.
Okay, first question is, do these accessibility standards apply to mobile devices as well?
Yes, they do. Mobile applications, it does apply to them. An iPhone, just so you know, natively out of the box is one of the most accessible devices out there, natively by itself. But if you create an app for like an iPhone, what happens is that app itself could become, not accessible. We actually we assisted Morgan Stanley, and their app actually, the login, instead of saying login, visually it said login on the screen, but it said guitar as the screen reader went over it. You also had, the log out was clock face. It said these weird words that somebody on the back end thought were meaningless, but they actually had meaning, the labels. So it's very important to make sure your applications, and like I said, with Apple specifically, they have an accessibility tool, to help you design a good application.
And so next question about, to see if I make sure I understand the question correctly here. Visually impaired person, myself, I find apps to be highly non-compliant. Do they fall under the ADA? I think
yes, they do. Yes, they do. They need to be compliant.
So all applications do as well?
Absolutely. Even software. I mean, for example, QuickBooks from Intuit. It's a 30-year-old desktop program. We actually help them become accessible. They actually had to change coding within the the software itself to become accessible so that the screens can be read. They were very helpful with this. They were very eager to actually make it accessible because they're realizing, I mean, we put like 500 accountants back to work because the program is now accessible to people with disabilities, and and specifically blind people. Our accountant for years was blind, and she became so busy she couldn't even handle us anymore because she was able to go back to work.
Yeah, great. And a good point about even webinars like this, Anthony, should be ADA accessible. Now, one of the recommendations to have closed captioning on. So we got to check and see if Zoom or GoToWebinar, those type of services allow for that, or through a streaming service.
Yeah, or we could do it.
Yeah,
we can actually do the closed captioning, and also you need the voiceover. If, for example, in my case, I mean, I'm a partially bald person. It would actually say, unfortunately, say that it would voice over and give you an idea of what the video is showing.
Mm-hmm. So lots of questions coming in. I'm going to keep them coming here. What about admin sites for businesses? Like, so the back end of a WordPress site that are not client focused, but admin focused or admin facing.
Needs to be accessible.
They need to be accessible as well.
Absolutely. Yes. Even on the back end, because otherwise you're discriminating against hiring people with disabilities. I mean, you should be able to hire a person with a disability that can use that software on the back end. So it's important that get, but the public facing, I mean, from a legal standpoint, you need to do that first, because from a numbers standpoint, I mean, you're going to have many more people that are trying to access the public side, but it's just as important to do the backside as well. So that's, that should answer that, hopefully.
And what about accessibility standards mandate inclusion of languages like Spanish or French? Is that included in the ADA standards?
Absolutely, yes.
So either other languages as well.
Yeah, regardless of the language. I mean, keep in mind, this is just not a United States thing. It's worldwide. Some of the standards over the the EU and so on are even stricter than ours. So in Canada too, they have their own standards. So they all kind of base off the W3C though. But it's
But I think
important
the
that no
question
matter what
here
the
was,
language. Mhm.
does your website, if it's in English now, have to be translated to Spanish for people that are non-English speaking, even if you're in the US?
As far as the language,
I
you
think
can
that's
use
good.
it.
I think that's good business, but I don't know if that's an
Yeah, no, that's
accessibility
good
thing.
business. It's good business. We're talking about as long as the fields are labeled. If they're labeled in English, you could use a translator that would translate it. I mean, you can use Google Translate in a lot of cases to translate a website. But the thing is, if it's not accessible, if that field is not labeled, if it just says field 1, it's going to translate it into 20 different languages for you, but it's still going to say field 1. So you have to make sure that it actually says first name, last name. So at least if it translates it, it will translate it properly.
Gotcha. What about websites on Wix or Squarespace or other? Can the Wave web accessibility tool work to fix that?
The Wave doesn't fix anything. What it does, it kind of tells you if there's a problem. Again, it only tells you that, it's, again, 40 to 50% accurate. It implies that there's a problem there. It could be like an image that's missing a label. But that image, all right, if it's like a photograph of a person walking along the beach, with their dog, that needs to be labeled as a person walking along the beach with a dog during the sunset, let's say. But if it's a small dot or something, kind of a spacer that's just used as a blank image to space out something, what you need to do there then is not label it, but actually put a null so that the screen reader knows to skip it. It's just decorative. Decorative images don't need to be labeled. So that's what's Wave is going to pull those out as if they needed to be labeled. So it needs to. You have to kind of interpret the Wave accessibility tool.
So
It's
those
just
will
a
still
guide.
work with Squarespace and Wix and all those other. They'll just tell you what you need to correct.
They're going to tell you if there's a problem. You need to work with a person that knows what they're doing along with the tool. The tool, this Wave tool, is just gives you a guide. It gives you an idea. If it comes up, it says 50 problems on the site or 22 problems on just the homepage. All right, that's all it's looking at. You have some issues. All right, even if one of them is bad, you have a major issue. So you need to address it. It's just a tool that we use as a guide.
And I think so. The next question, I think I know the answer to this one. Do I need a certified expert to make sure the website is compliant, or by using the Wave web tool, is it possible to fix the website without an expert? I think we know the answer to this one.
Yeah,
I think you
here's
just
the
answered
thing.
that.
Yeah, you really need somebody who knows what they're doing. That's your website designer. If you don't have one, find one that already knows, that is a CPAC certified accessibility expert. You need that, because then at least you have a person that knows what they're doing and so on. The Wave tool will not. You don't want to use that as your certification tool.
Great. One other question. What about red text on a site for red/green colorblind folks? I see lots of that.
Yes.
Is that non-compliant?
Yes. So you're very careful with that's color contrast. All right. There are checkers for that too. There are websites just geared around, and Wave will help you with that too. But about helping with color contrast, because if you have, even at my age, I have, my vision's okay, but if I see like light gray text on a white background, I'm gonna have a hard time reading it. Just help the elderly here, make it bolder, darker, larger. It's just prudent thing to do. You want to make the site easy to read, navigate, and so on. But color contrast is very important for everyone, not just people that are colorblind. But keeping that in mind, because if you have something like a red on a green and so on, and that text is going to disappear into the background.
So one last question, and I think that's it for all of our questions. Their website is on WordPress, and there's many WordPress plugins that that claim to make the website compliant with ADA compliance standards. What is your thoughts on those?
It's a good point, because WordPress and also Wix have made a commitment to be accessible. However, that commitment doesn't really extend to the third-party tools. You can use accessible templates. That's great. All right, with that, but that's a starting point. The minute you put an image in that template, or the minute you put a calendar picker or something like that on there, you got to make sure that's accessible. Otherwise, you're breaking it from day one. That's why you still need to know what you're doing. You still need to have the basic knowledge of when you put an image up, you need to put alternate text on it. When you put a label up, a field label, you need to make sure on the background that it's labeled and also that the field is labeled above it so that you can see it. Things like that. You need to make sure that, even though the site, WordPress, Wix is already accessible by nature, you need to make sure anything you're putting on it is also in compliance.
But I think the question for this one, Anthony, was around the actual plugins that when they run, they can change the contrast or.
Yeah, no, those plugins, some of them are very good because those are just enhancing, like they'll allow you to increase the size of the text. They'll do the color contrast for you. That's all well and good, but you got to make sure that the basic code, the basic site is accessible. That the basic rules are still being followed. The enhancements are great. The plugins are great, okay? Because that's just going to help you further. But you still have to make sure the basic site is still in compliance. The other piece of it too, if you're using like a shopping cart and you put a shopping cart on there that's not accessible, you're still ultimately responsible for that. It's your site. So if you get sued, you're going to get sued even though that plugin was not yours. Okay, so you still have to make sure all the plugins you're using are accessible. So if you have, like in a lot of places, one website may use 5 different background, add-ins. Those all need to be accessible. All right, and that's why, I mean, sometimes, we, as on our end, we have to contact those third parties to say, hey, you're not accessible. What are you guys doing to make it accessible? Because we still want to use your tool, because sometimes there's no real good alternative. So we want to work with them.
Gotcha. And one last question stuck in while you're explaining that. I'm an SEO professional. I'm also very hesitant sometimes about doing all this accessibility work because it may ruin our SEO. What's your thoughts on that? I think you and I have spoken about that numerous times.
It's opposite. I mean, if you looked at, I think, Sue, you're the one that told us about our overall health of the website is one of the highest you've seen. Bottom line is it helps the SEO. It just makes it, because again, Google's blind. All right, Google's going to read the site. Just by throwing in like even your titles and stuff, some people use it for an SEO, for SEO only, but you have to, from a compliance standpoint, you got to make sure those titles are actually the titles of the site, of those pages. They got to be accurate. Within the page itself, in the context of the page, you can, put in the way you word things and stuff like that. It will help you with the SEO. But in general, just by fact that you're tagging all the images, you're putting in descriptive text and so on, will help you with SEO. It's helped us.
So I think that's all of our questions. I will invite Brian just to call one last time and wrap everything up. But Anthony, thanks for doing this, and Brian, over to you.
Thanks, Stuart. Thanks, Anthony. Really appreciate everyone for joining us. Here at Atelis, we're not experts in the compliance, the ADA compliance world, but we're trying to bring in the experts to talk to you guys about those concerns. I really appreciate the participation that everyone has had. We will be following up this presentation with the actual PowerPoint and links to everything for you, as well as some more information on how to contact us, how to contact Anthony, and how we can help you out if you have any other questions, issues, or concerns. Again, very much appreciate everyone for joining. Hopefully everyone's staying dry with the weather, at least on the East Coast today, and wish everybody the best. And hopefully you can join us next month with ID Agent and talking a little bit about dark web scanning and some of our security, some of everyone's security concerns. So with that being said, everyone have a great day and look forward to catching up soon.